He's heating up!
They are the titans of modern mythology. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. For over 80 years, DC Comics has defined the superhero. They were the first, the archetypes, the gods among mortals. But being first doesn't always mean staying on top. DC Comics' journey is a story of groundbreaking success and baffling missteps, a marketing history defined by its own incredible legacy. How did the undisputed king of comics find itself in a perpetual race for the top spot? What's up, everybody? I'm X. I run Perspective Reports, and today we're breaking down the marketing histories of DC and Marvel Comics. And in celebration of the Superman movie, we are simply looking at the best and worst strategies that defined these massive comic titans into the modern era and how they have been able to continue and sustain their success. After all, the fact that everybody knows who Superman, Iron Man, the Avengers, Batman, so many other superheroes that define and still to this day influence so many of us. So let's jump into it. We're going to have a little bit of fun. This is part of our wider series where we're going to take marketing history deep dives into various topics, and we're starting with DC Comics versus Marvel. Let's get into it. Also, we have our topics and reports hub on our website, perspectivereports.com. Check it out. The beta is ready and live. Would love to get your feedback. And so let's begin. Remember, Perspective Reports, your world strategized. We break down relevant topics that matter to you, and we come up with strategies, solutions that we believe will allow opportunities to grow. So join us, come on this journey. We got a lot of great things coming.
Up next, more
Perspective Reports.
on Nick. Fantastic.
It all started with Action Comics #1 in 1938. The arrival of Superman wasn't just a new character, it was the birth of a genre and a marketing masterstroke, and a new dawn for a modern take on American optimism. Which leads us to best strategy #1, the archetype advantage. DC didn't just create characters, it created ideals. Superman was hope, Batman was justice, and Wonder Woman was truth. This foundational, almost mythic branding made them instantly recognizable and timeless. They were marketed not just as action heroes, but as moral paragons for America. This led to early dominance in licensing. By the 1940s, Superman had a radio show, animated shorts, and a balloon in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. DC Comics established its characters as cultural icons, moving them beyond the page long before anyone else. The Silver Age in the late 50s and 1960s doubled down on this, introducing sci-fi concepts and expanding the pantheon with characters like The Flash and Green Lantern. The strategy was clear. DC was the established universe, the reliable home of heroes. But as the world changed, DC's godlike heroes began to feel distant. Marvel Comics had burst onto the scene with flawed, relatable characters, and DC's squeaky clean image suddenly felt dated. This is where the cracks began to show, which leads us to the worst strategy #1, creative stagnation and reactive storytelling. For years, DC was accused of being creatively conservative, while Marvel was tackling real-world issues. DC was often stuck in fantastical, kid-friendly tales. Their attempts to get serious in the Bronze Age felt reactive rather than innovative. They were following a trend, not setting one. The solution DC Comics came up with to address all these issues, in hindsight, can be seen as radical. In 1985, Crisis on Infinite Earths rebooted their entire universe, which leads us to best strategy #2, the universe-shattering event. Infinite Crisis was a brilliant, if risky, marketing move. It created a massive sales spike, generated immense buzz, and streamlined decades of confusing continuity. It established the event comic as a blockbuster sales driver, a strategy DC would return to again and again. It was a declaration that their universe mattered and the stakes were higher than ever. In the modern era, DC's greatest marketing successes came from outside the comic shop. Tim Burton's Batman in 1989 proved the mainstream appetite for serious superhero films. Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy took it to another level, achieving critical and commercial acclaim, which leads us to best strategy #3, prestige, standalone storytelling. DC found immense success by allowing visionary creators to tell dark, mature, and standalone stories. The Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, and Nolan's films were marketed as prestige events, not just comic book movies. This positioned DC as the home of sophisticated adult-oriented superhero narratives. However, their attempt to replicate Marvel's interconnected film universe, the DC Extended Universe, was a different story, which leads us to worst strategy number 2 and 3. With number 2 being the rushed cinematic universe. Where Marvel spent years building to the Avengers, the DC Extended Universe felt rushed and tonally inconsistent. It was a clear attempt to chase a competitor's success, and the marketing suffered because of that. Trailers were grim, the tone was confusing, and it alienated audiences who wanted the hope and optimism inherent in characters like Superman. And the felt loss of this optimism leads us to worst strategy number 3, which is inconsistent brand identity. Is DC the dark, gritty universe of the Joker and the Batman, or the bright, hopeful world of Shazam and Wonder Woman, or somewhere in the middle with the Suicide Squad? The answer is all of the above. This lack of a cohesive, overarching brand identity in its mainstream marketing has created confusion and made it difficult to build the same kind of loyal and all-encompassing fan base that its rival enjoys. Not that it doesn't exist, but it's just not as, let's say, virulent. What can we learn from the marketing history of DC Comics? Well, let's break down the 3 best and 3 worst strategies, review and talk about them, and come to some conclusions. And we'll start with the 3 best strategies, which were the archetype advantage, which was creating timeless mythic characters who became cultural pillars. We're talking about the Supermans, the Batmans, the Wonder Womans, the Flash, Green Lantern, right? Robin, Teen Titans, Aquaman, right? We can keep going. There's a reason why half the characters of The Boys, great show, are satirizing DC comic characters, not Marvel, because historically speaking, DC Comics was the gold standard, right? If it wasn't for such iconic leadership, and we'll get into that a little bit later, from Marvel in this form of Stan Lee, right? DC Comics would still have the run-of-the-mill just based on iconic characters alone, which leads us to the best strategy number 2, the universe-shattering event, which was the reboot Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was using a massive comic event like Crisis to drive sales and reboot the continuity, which essentially, right, what we're doing is seeing where the trends, right, adapting to new trends, adapting your brand to modern taste, to modern engagement methods, modern storytelling, modern plot devices. And while it might seem old now, seeing as all of that was 40 plus years ago now with Infinite Earths coming out in 1985, what they were doing at the time was still, now it's just considered, right, the standard. But back then, that was just, it broke the mold, and it really should be remembered and honored for doing that, because it really brought back comic book sales and interest in a big way. And that leads to prestige and standalone storytelling as the best strategy number 3, which was allowing visionary directors and writers to create mature and acclaimed works that elevated the brand. We're talking about, right, the Joker with Joaquin Phoenix. We're talking about Christopher Nolan's trilogy. We're speaking to Tim Burton's Batman right in the 90s. I mean, I was a fan of all the 90s ones, even the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. I loved all of it personally, but, even the dark, gritty reboots, right, with the animated series, whether that was Superman, Batman Beyond, the Batman animated series, there was so many opportunities that DC took to allow unique storytelling of their franchise. And I think that worked for a while because the iconic and the brand recognition of the, superheroes that were getting the Hollywood treatment, right, was able to buoy the brand. But now what we see with Marvel reshaping the mold themselves by creating an extended universe, DC's playing catch up because it was all unstructured. It was nothing created, nothing looped back into itself to create a holistic storytelling that was able to be an accessible, unique brand that people can just know from that, right? DC Comics is XYZ, where Marvel Comics comes with all the, millions of people, right? I mean, Marvel Comics was able to make Ant-Man a household name, right? You know who Blue Beetle is, or maybe that's DC. Either way, the point is that, Marvel going and creating a holistic brand identity was allowing the characters to then be able to step up and represent that brand, whereas DC was reliant on their iconic characters to represent that brand and the brand to be known based on the iconic characters, if that makes sense. Now, moving on to the worst three strategies, right? Let's review that, which is number one, creative stagnation, right? Falling behind the times by being too conservative and reactive to trends set by others. Again, right, this kind of goes back to, right, the lack of a strong generational leader like someone like Stan Lee that Marvel Comics was very lucky to have, who created so many of the modern stories and shaped the modern Marvel brand. And it wasn't all Stan Lee, but it's just the presence of somebody consistent like that is kind of what made the difference into an extended universe and a legendary, iconic comic brand house that has characters that carry the brand name, right? And I think now there's catch up, right? There's learning, there's licking the wounds from getting let's say a lot of learning curves from rebooting the franchises, rebooting the DC extended universe, because it was just all so public. That's the problem, right? With Marvel, everything seemed buttoned up, even if everything wasn't a smash hit number one, right? It's the fact that we still have the expectation that, oh, okay, Marvel's going to come together and come up with something new, even if, let's say, maybe this Marvel movie or that Marvel movie may not have been, number one blockbuster as well written as I thought. They're going to go back to the drawing board and come back with that consistency to feed into the narrative that they're already creating, which helps them so much. Whereas DC is only just getting to that now. Right, which only leads to opportunities, and we'll see right here with this brand new reboot under James Gunn. We'll see where things go, and that leads to number two, the rushed cinematic universe, right, which kind of just plays off of what I already just said, right, which is chasing a competitor's model, Marvel, without the necessary patience and planning, leading to brand confusion. And that brand confusion, right, leads to Wonder Woman franchise starting and then stopping. It leads to an Aquaman's franchise starting, then stopping. It leads to a Superman franchise starting and stopping, right? It leads to, right, we go from, Christopher Nolan's Batman to Ben Affleck Batman to Robert Pattinson Batman to the Joker. Where's the consistency? Where are things overlaid, right? On top of that, you have all these DC shows. How do those layer in, right? How are we layering all that in? How are we layering the Titans? How are we layering in all these different, things? Whereas for Marvel, whether it's TV and movie, it all layers in, right? You're watching, the TV shows of Marvel, whether that's new ones like Ironheart or other ones like WandaVision, or even the Incredible She-Hulk, right? Still layering back in to the bigger Marvel universe with all the heavy hitter movies. And that leads to number three, which is inconsistent brand identity, a failure to market a clear, unified vision of their universe to a mass audience, right? And again, it's the fact that you're not coming out prepared, buttoned up with a storytelling that can encompass and scale within itself. And that's the thing, your scalability was always the issue, right? You weren't telling stories that could scale. You were just telling really awesome stories that were self-contained in their own universe that weren't really connected. Whereas Marvel, even if the thread was so thin and so loose, it was still being done. And all this to say, this one isn't really about coming up with specific strategies and what they should do this, what they should do that. This is just more a simple deep dive into what made the marketing, what were the consistent threads that created the iconic brand that was DC and still is DC into this day. It's nothing to sneeze at that for almost 100 years people can name your characters, right? They're part of Americana, just like Mickey Mouse, Superman, Batman. They are on the Mount Rushmore of American iconic characters, right? Of pop culture characters, because that's what they are. They are American pop culture. And I think that's just something to be celebrated, but also to look at with where are the opportunities to grow. And DC's legacy, it's its greatest strength and its heaviest burden, right? By embracing the bold, iconic nature of its heroes while finding a consistent vision for their future, the original titans of the comic world can still define what it means to be a superhero for generations to come. And I think that's by embracing the new, creating scalable storytelling, and then on top of that, really just paying attention to how I think the audience wants to have their stories be told to them, right? I think there's so much cool opportunity to create, digital story narratives using social media, using, gameplay narrative. We see, with Superman now on Fortnite and all these cool things like that. That's awesome. Those are fun opportunities, but it's like, get creative with the interactive, man. You got VR opportunities, you have in theater placements, you have so many cool things that don't just have to stay within the comics. That's the whole point. That's why Marvel had to go to the extended universe. That's why DC has to follow suit, right? You have to continue to adapt a brand that was known for one medium, comic book, that has to burst outside of that, right? To maintain itself, to scale itself, to right size itself into the modern age. You have to, right, present yourself in different ways. And that includes the music, the stories, the characters, podcasting, just how you create, right? Whether, with DC and all the stuff they put on Max, right? How, all of that interacts and interlays and overlays with their, continued plans to expand the universe. But again, let's see how things ride, because, it's only the beginning for them, right? Literally, Superman just coming out. We'll see how things go. Let's stay positive. Let's be hopeful, because if Superman can succeed and DC Comics can succeed in really challenging Marvel again for, I think, narrative supremacy, that's fun. That's competition. That's capitalism, baby. And that's what makes America great, when it's a healthy, competitive market with options for the best entertainment that makes people feel like, they can be excited and have something that matters to them or speaks to them again. All right, that's all I got for DC Comics. Stay tuned for the Marvel Comics video. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day. Like and subscribe for more, and let's keep it going.